Alright, welcome back everyone to Manny's School of Art for what will be our final episode in the watercolor series. In today's episode, we're going to focus on different methods that we can use to protect our watercolors when they are done. As we know, watercolors are not considered permanent mediums, so they have to be protected before displaying them and before shipping them out. So the focus of this episode is to show you 4 different ways that you can use to protect your watercolors, and then hopefully one of these methods will work well for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started, and see you in a minute. So the first method is by far the less expensive and the fastest method, and it has its pros and cons just like anything else. So you want to use this method whenever you have a lot of pieces that you have to get ready, or when you're just wanting to sell the artwork and not worrying about like framing or anything like that. This keeps the cost down for you. It also keeps the cost down for the customers. And all you have to do is prepare your artwork and purchase these bags, right? And they're relatively inexpensive. So this is a bag of 25. It was $7.99. And the big thing is to make sure that it's archival, right? Because you don't want this to damage the artwork with acid or anything like that. And they come in different sizes. So this particular one is an 11 by 14, but they come all the way down from like 8 by 10. I've seen them as big as 18 by 24. So it's pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to show you this real quick. What you want to do basically is you just want to put a kit together for your client. So you get the artwork, you cut it to the same size as the bag. Then you also want to include a mat, and I cut my own mat, so this is not a problem. But if you have to buy a mat, make sure that you get 2 measurements. The outside measurement is for the size of the frame, and then the inside measurement is for the opening. So, for example, in this one here, this painting is a lot smaller than that one, so this mat would have been way too big. So on this one, I actually cut it to 2 inches wide to accommodate for the size of this particular painting. Okay. So I'll show you this a little bit more in a minute. And then you also need a piece of 1/4 inch foam board cut to the same size. And I like to cut them just a little bit shy, just to make it easier to go into the bag. Alright, so for this method, really all you're doing is you're putting a kit together for the client, the customer. Then they decide how they want to display it. So you put your backing board in there. Then the artwork with a mat. Now I use neutral mats when I do this. Chances are that the customer is probably going to change the color of the mat anyways. So I just keep it neutral. And then if they decide that they want to do something different, they may do so. And then in the back, you put your business card or instructions or thank you notes or whatever you want. And then you simply peel this back here. I'm not going to do it because I got to do some more work on that. But you peel this back right here and you seal it. That's it. It's ready for display or to be put on sale. The disadvantage of this technique is, number one, if you're doing art shows or art exhibitions, these are usually not acceptable. You have to have your work completely framed and ready to hang. The other disadvantage is that you're working with plastic. So this is not a permanent solution. This is a temporary solution so that when the person purchases, then they can take it home and finish it. These things can scratch fairly easily and they can also rip. But if you're doing craft fairs and you have a lot of these to put together and you just want people to focus and purchase the artwork without worrying about frames or anything, this is a good way to go. The second method of protecting your watercolors is just to put them behind a glass frame. And this has a lot of advantages when it's done. it is ready to be hung up. The person purchasing it, or if you're putting it in a show, they don't really have to do anything. They just purchase it, hang it up, and that's it. However, you have to take into consideration the cost of the frame and the labor that goes into it, and then you have to add that to your price. So that can be a deterrent for some people. You really only have three choices when it comes to frames. You can buy a brand new frame, which they're getting ridiculously costly. You can make your own frames like I typically do, since I have a little wood shop in my garage, or you can refurbish frames, which is what I'm doing with this one here, and I attached a video to how this was done. Okay? So make sure that you have your frame. Then here you do have to pay a little bit more attention to the color of your mat. I'm going to be using this here because I have a bunch of it, but you may decide that you want to use a different color mat, right? Because once you seal this, it's all one unit. So, and then you also want to make sure that you get the composition the way you want it. So let me scoot this over here for a minute. I mentioned before that sometimes the painting is actually smaller than the frame, but it's a good size frame. So I cut this mat, and then what I'm going to do is I put a 2-inch border around this, and then I'm going to use the mat, and I'm going to go and I'm going to like pick out the best composition, which to me, I think right about there. Okay. Now I'm going to carefully flip this over, and I'm only going to attach the top. So I'm holding it here, squeezing it right there. Okay. Make sure that the tape that you're using is archival, so that again it doesn't damage the artwork. And you're going to be putting this on the top. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut 2 little pieces, and I'm going to place them on the top only. And the reason for that is you want the artwork to move within the frame, right? It expands and contracts just a little bit. So you want that. You want to allow some movement there based on the conditions. Okay, check it over, make sure it's good, because again, once you put this in there, you don't want to have to take it apart again. Okay, little dust particles. I've already cleaned the inside of the glass, so now it's just a matter of doing an install. So I'm going to place that in there, just like so. I'm going to put the backing board on it. Okay, once you have everything sandwiched together, just give it a quick check before you put the pins in. It looks good. So now it's just a matter of putting the pins in. So, and I use this little thing right here, and you just put it in there, you squeeze, and it goes in. But you can also use finishing nails if you're being very careful. Make sure that you're not damaging the glass. I have seen frames that have staples, but I don't really care for the staples, so I stay away from those. And then give it a once over. Make sure everything is good to go. If it is, then you flip it over, you take your double-sided tape, you put a strip all the way around, and you put your cover on the back, which is just archival paper, really. I don't have any, so I'm not going to do that right now. And then you would install your hardware, and then it is good to go. So this method, the advantages of this is that this is a finished work. Whoever purchases it, or if you're putting it on display or doing an art show, it's ready. You don't have to do anything else. This is all ready to go. The disadvantage is cost. Frames have gotten very, very expensive, and finding good quality frames is going to cost you, or you're going to have to spend a lot of time refurbishing the frame. In either case, you're going to have to add the cost to the piece. The other disadvantage is that somebody may be really into the artwork, but they may not be like thrilled with the frame that you chose. And then, will that push them away? Or would they be willing to purchase it and then deal with the frame or replace the frame themselves? So things to take into consideration if you go with this method. All right, the third method that I want to show you, it's a little bit more labor intensive because it requires us to permanently attach our artwork onto a backing panel, and then we also have to wax it to protect it. And again, there's pros and cons to this. So let me show you what I got going on. So the panels, if you get panels like this, you can either buy them, just the panels by themselves, or you could buy them already attached to a backing board. I'm going to be using this for another one. I prefer to buy them by themselves, and then I can cut them down to whatever size I need. I make these myself in my little wood shop. But if you don't have the ability to do that, you can just purchase them already built, and they come in different sizes. The big thing is make sure that they're hardboard or birchwood, and make sure that they're sealed so that they're archival. Okay. This particular one is a 9x12 by 1/8, so I have to make sure that the artwork is going to fit on that. So what I've done, I've taken some scrap paper and I've actually made a window that's 9.5 by 12.5, so that's going to give me a little bit of extra. And I'm going to use this to figure out exactly how I want my image to look. So let's say that I want to do that right there. What I want to do is I want to take a sharp object like this, and I want to poke through these corners. I got a piece of cardboard behind this so that I'm not poking into the table, but I want to poke through that so that I can register these 4 corners when I flip my paper over. And then I'm going to flip my paper over. You can see the 4 little dots, and I'm just going to connect those together. So I'm going to connect these 4 dots together so that when I'm doing the glue up, I know exactly where the wood panel needs to be. Later on, all of this will get cut away, so it doesn't matter whether you do it with a pen or a pencil or anything like that. It's just registration marks to help you with the building. Okay, so there we have it. And what that's going to allow me to do is when I get ready to do the glue up, I'm going to be able to put this right there. That gives me a 1/4 inch reveal all the way around. And then I know that when I remove the extra paper later on, that the composition is going to be the way I want it. Okay. Now I'm not going to cut this paper off right now because I'm going to use that for any squeeze out. Okay. So what do we need for this? Well, you need a hard panel to whatever size you want. You're going to need some Mod Podge, a container to put it in, because I'm going to be using a 4-inch brush which won't fit in the bottle. And then I'm also going to use, I have 2 of these boards for weight, and also they're nice and flat, so because we do have to let this dry overnight. And a brush, a 4-inch brush. So let me get all that stuff together and then we'll get started. Alright, so I put down a little piece of paper just to make sure that I don't get anything on my table. And what we're going to do is we actually have to put Mod Podge on both of these things. And then we're going to sandwich them together, put some weight on them, and let them sit overnight. Alright, so I'm going to give this a good shaking, or so you can stir it. And I'm actually using a 2-inch synthetic brush for this, and it doesn't go in there very easily, so that's why we use this right here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to pour the Mod Podge in there, try to keep it out of the way, and I'm going to put a pretty liberal coat on both of these. And I want to make sure that I take it just past the pencil line, right? Because I don't want any dry areas. So putting that just past the pencil line. And I want to make sure that I'm really covering the surface. So you don't want to put this on too thin. You don't want to. You don't want to do what is called starving a joint, and they call that in woodworking, where you don't have enough wood, or excuse me, you don't have enough glue, and that's never a good thing. So you want to make sure that you have this nicely covered. You want to do the same thing on this one. So especially the edges, right? We want to make sure that we have really nice connection on the edges, but really you want to make sure that it's everywhere, because you don't want like any air bubbles. You don't want anything left in either. Alright, so that's pretty well covered. On both. And now it's just a matter of putting them together and letting them dry overnight. So also got to make sure that we clean this brush before the stuff has its time to dry. So what I like to do is I'm going to put my first board down, and I should have probably done this ahead of time, like so. Move this over there for a minute. So I want to put this down just like that, and then I want to take this right here and I want to line it up so that I have about a 1/4 inch reveal all the way around. And then I want to really make sure to press it down. So you can see the reason that I left the extra paper was so that it would catch any of the overflow. Now I'm going to flip it over, and I want to make sure there are no air bubbles. If you have a brayer, you can use a brayer or a rolling pin to make sure that you can smooth that out. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my second flat board, just like so, place it on top of this, and then I'm going to put some weight on this and let it sit overnight. So I'm going to move this to a different table, put some weight on it, and then we'll get back to this. Alright, so the gallery frame that we're going to do starts off exactly the same way, so I'm just going to go ahead and prepare this one as well, and then I'll show you how they differ when we put the two different finishes on them. I'll put a board on top of it, put some weight on it, and let it sit overnight. Alright, so we've given the panel 24 hours to dry. Then I went ahead and trimmed the extra paper off, and then I sealed it, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that while I'm explaining this. So this is ready to go. So the way that we're going to finish this is we are actually going to be using this cold wax medium, and it's super easy to apply. You just basically put it on, let it sit, and then buff it off. Now you want to make sure that you're using a cold wax medium. Don't use like automotive wax, or don't use like wood furniture wax, because this is formulated for artwork. So it's archival, and it's been refined to a point where it works really well with artwork. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward. So all you want to do is take a little bit of this, and anytime you're putting wax on anything, you always want to put the wax on really thin. So I'm going to lift this up, and you just rub this all the way around. Okay, make sure that the surface is clean, make sure that your hands are clean, and it takes very little effort to do this. This stuff goes a long way. And the nice thing about this is that it can be used on other surfaces. So like you can use this to seal acrylics, as long as the acrylics are completely cured. And you can also use it for sealing oils. I've never used it on oils, but it can be done. And it's pretty straightforward. You're just going to go through and put this on. Finish it out. Now you can apply this wax right over the watercolors without actually spraying it with a fixative, because water and wax do not mix. So the watercolors will not reactivate when you put the wax on top of it. And I'll show you one that I did. But for me, I just feel a little bit more comfortable spraying it with a fixative first, just to put a little bit of a barrier between the wax and the painting. So, but I did do a test on one of my practice ones. I'll show you that in a minute, without spraying it with a fixative, and it worked just fine. It didn't mix, it didn't reactivate the watercolors at all. And so now we're going to take a clean, lint-free cloth, cotton cloth, and we're just going to buff this out. Now the advantage to using this technique is that you no longer need the glass. So that means that when you are looking for frames, you can look for frames that have glass and remove the glass, or you can look for open frames. You don't have to worry about shipping and having glass broken or anything like that. The disadvantage is you still need a frame, right? Because the panel is way too thin to display without a frame, and it takes a little bit more time. But the effect that you get is a really nice satin finish. I don't know if the camera's picking that up. And you don't have to worry about the glass. Another advantage is that you can change the shapes of these, right? So like if you had a nice oval frame or a diamond frame like this frame right here, if you plan ahead, you can actually cut the panel to the shape of the frame and then build your artwork around that. So this is one of the reasons why sometimes, well, one of the reasons why I like to buy the panels without the stretcher bars. Now, if you are like me and you want to do a little overkill, you can use one of these brushes. We used to use these to shine our shoes, and you just go through and you give it a final buff. And basically all that does is just make sure that the wax is nice and smooth. It gets rid of like fingerprints. And there you have it. So once you're done buffing the entire painting, check it over. You got to put it up against the light because it's hard to see what's been waxed and what hasn't been waxed. So put it up against the light and then look at it from the side to make sure that everything has been covered. If it hasn't, then just go ahead and put a second coat on it, which I'm probably going to do with this one. After I'm done, then it'll be ready to put in the frame. So I built this floating frame and it's not finished yet, but what's going to happen is this artwork is going to sit right down there. It's going to have a 1/4 inch reveal all the way around, and it's going to be attached with Velcro. So then attach the hardware and it'll be ready to hang. Now, I mentioned a little while ago that you can apply the wax directly on top of the watercolors. So this is a little sample that I did, and I actually put the wax directly on this painting without using a fixative on it first, and it worked just fine. The colors didn't mix, they didn't smudge, so you can do it. I just prefer to put a fixative on before putting the wax on, just to create a barrier between the painting and the wax. Alright, so the last method that I'm going to show you is how to apply varnish onto watercolors. It's pretty easy. So we've already got everything cut, we've already got everything sealed. That's very important. Make sure that you seal it first, because we're actually going to be using a brush with this. If you don't seal it and you start putting the varnish on here, you're going to reactivate the watercolors and it's going to ruin it. So it's very, very important that you seal it first with the fixative and let it dry thoroughly before moving on to this step. Okay. I took some masking tape and I just protected a little bit of the wood, because later on I'm actually going to paint this wood a different color. I'm not sure which color yet, which is why I haven't painted it yet. But I want to just give it a little bit of protection there. Okay. So the process is pretty easy. First thing you want to do, you want to have a nice large, I'm using the synthetic brush, super soft, so that we can kind of minimize the brush strokes. You're going to want a clean container to put this in. You're going to need a tack cloth, and that's it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go with the high gloss. Give it a quick shake, or you can stir it, and then I'm going to pour a little bit in here. Now you can see this stuff looks like a milky white, but it dries crystal clear, so don't freak out when you see that. Okay. Now before we start painting, I'm going to take my tack cloth, which is basically a cloth that it's got a sticky substance on it, and what that will do, it will pick up any dust particles that may have landed on here. And then it's just a matter of putting on the varnish, and I recommend 3 coats with you got to wait 30 minutes in between coats. So what I like to do is my first coat I'll go on a horizontal, then I'll let it dry, then I'll put my second coat at a vertical, and then my third coat at a diagonal. I'm just going to show you the first coat, and then the rest is just repetition. So I'm going to charge up my brush, and what I like to do is I like to do little crisscross strokes. and then just smooth it out in the direction that I want. And I always want to overlap a little bit. This is super fast. And when I'm going across, I'm using virtually no paint or no pressure on the paintbrush. Okay, because all I'm doing when I do that is I'm trying to get rid of some of the brush strokes, which is why I use a super soft brush. It'll also get rid of like those little air bubbles that you see right there. If you just barely skim the surface, super light pressure, and that's it. So I'm going to kind of turn this. Hopefully the camera will pick up how shiny it is, how wet it is. Make sure that there's no drips or anything like that. Like right there, there's a little bit of actually it's not, it was the color of the paint underneath. So, but you're looking for a nice consistent application. Really brings out the colors in the watercolors. So I'm going to set this aside in a clean environment to dry about 30 minutes. Then I'm going to do my second coat, let that dry for another 30 minutes, and do my third coat. The advantages to this is that when it's done, it's done. You paint the color of the wood, whatever color you want. You put your hardware on it, and it is good to go. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to worry about frames, glass, or anything like that. This is I believe they call this a gallery frame, so you do paint the sides. Or if you're using like fancy woods, like I do sometimes, then you can put a clear finish on the wood itself so that you can show off the grain of the wood. But this is just plain pine, so I'm going to go ahead and paint it. Okay. Very important, make sure that you clean the brush thoroughly with soap and water. You don't want any contaminants on this, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to give that a really good clean and then repeat the process in 30 minutes. Always making sure to clean the brush after each application. Alright, so there you have it. 4 different ways that you can use to protect your watercolors before displaying them or shipping them or putting them in shows or whatever your intentions are. Some are very easy to do, some are a little bit more time consuming, some are a little bit more work intensive, but they're all very effective. Let me know in the comments which one you like the best, which method you like the best, or if there's a different method that I didn't cover, I would love to hear about it. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. I've enjoyed bringing this series to you, and I will see you on the next video.